I'm Frederick. They told me this in a whisper. Now, you'll hear it. Enjoy watching. Nia woke up to the sound of rain drumming on the window glass, as if the sky had decided to say something today. Loudly and insistently, without words, just a knock. The air in the room was damp, and the walls seemed colder than usual. She sat up in bed, slowly, holding her stomach. The child inside her seemed to sense the tension and was moving quietly. Trudy was already sitting on the floor by the door, an old, shaggy dog with grey spots on her muzzle and eyes in which lived devotion, endured for years. Nia pulled on warm leggings, put on a long sweatshirt, wrapped a scarf around her neck and automatically, without breakfast, headed for the exit. Today was supposed to be an ordinary day. Another examination, everything according to plan. Just 20 minutes for the appointment and back home, where there was tea, a blanket, and peace. She closed the door. The rain intensified, but Trudy did not lag behind, slipping on the wet asphalt, but still cheerfully staying close. It was a 15-minute walk to the clinic, and in those 15 minutes, no one on the street paid any attention to them. The city was buzzing with its own life, and a pregnant black woman with a dog did not arouse any interest or sympathy in passers-by. Only one man in a hood turned around for a long time and whispered something, turning to the side. His words dissolved in the noise of passing cars. Nia felt it, like a cold under her skin, but did not pay attention. At the entrance to the clinic, the air became different, as if an invisible wall of glass and cold began even before the doors. The sign, "Acceptance by appointment only," was hanging crookedly. She pushed the door, and the smell of antiseptic and cheap plastic hit her nose. Behind the counter sat a young nurse with straightened hair and an absolutely empty look. She glanced at Nia, then looked down and said nothing. Nia stepped forward and, with quiet politeness, said that she was scheduled for 9:30, gave her name, and placed her insurance card on the counter. Silence. Then a look up at the dirt under her fingernails. "You have a dog?" the nurse said, as if that were a death sentence. "She's a service animal. She's calm. Without her, Nia began, but was interrupted. "We don't allow that. You need to leave the premises." The voice was emotionless, practiced, like a line from a script. "I'm 9 months pregnant. I'm scheduled. I just need to—" "Next!" the woman snapped, turning to the white woman behind her, who, without looking at Nia, had already stepped forward. Nia took a step back. She felt her cheeks flush. People around her began to whisper. Someone chuckled. One man in a jacket sighed loudly, as if she smelled of poverty. She approached the counter again. "I have the right to see you. Please. You are breaking the rules of the clinic. Call security," the nurse said somewhere in the depths of the room. 2 doors swung open almost simultaneously. One guard was young and confused. The second was tall, massive, with a look full of contempt. "Exit," he said, without raising his voice. Nia did not move. Pain, fear, and helplessness were mixed in her. "I beg you, at least let me sit." But he had already grabbed her elbow. Strength. A man's hand. Squeezing. He did not pull sharply, but firmly enough to show that she had no choice. Trudy barked, loudly, dully, as if she felt that something was wrong. The second guard kicked the dog, not hard, but enough to make it retreat and whine. The people in the hallway were turning away. No one said a word. The air outside was different, damp and humiliating. She stood there, unsure what to do. Contractions? No, not yet. But the heaviness was rising. It wasn't pain that was growing inside her. It was like a premonition. A wet bench near the entrance. She sat down. Trudy rested her muzzle on her lap. An elderly couple with umbrellas passed by. The man glanced briefly and whispered something to his wife. She snorted and quickened her pace. Her mobile battery died on the 3rd attempt to open her contacts. Her damp fingers wouldn't obey. No one answered. Not her friend, not her husband. It was too early, or maybe too late. She stood up and walked slowly along the sidewalk, thinking of only one thing: where to find another place, another doctor, any doctor. But inside, everything was shaking like a string. She felt that this day had cracked, that something had broken in it. In her. in the world, in relationships. She remembered how her husband hugged her in the morning, how he kissed her forehead, how he promised to take care of her. After all, he himself recommended this clinic. They have the best doctors, he said. Why was she now sitting in the rain, thrown out like garbage? She was thrown out not as a patient, not as a woman. She was thrown out as black, as unnecessary, and no one cared. Lightning flashed in the sky above the city. Trudy howled, and deep in her heart, Nia already knew there was no turning back. She stood in front of the glass door, breathing heavily from walking, and the moisture clinging to her clothes like a sticky shroud. It was warm inside, sterile, dry, but that only made it worse, as if this order had been built at the expense of her. Chaos. Nia pushed the door, and it opened with a short squeak, letting her into a cold, indifferent reception room. Everything was in light shades. The floor gleamed with cleanliness, the walls without a single crack. The lamps above burned immensely brightly, as if on purpose to expose every alien shadow on her face. White women in neat coats sat along the walls on grey chairs, some reading a magazine, some scrolling on their phones. But almost everyone, looked up when they saw her. First at her face, then at her stomach, then at the dog, and then at her face again. There was no surprise in those looks, just a clear, transparent assessment, as if she were not a person but a wet box that someone had accidentally carried into an expensive boutique. Trudy cleared her throat, and one of the women lifted her foot sharply, as if the dog might pounce. Nia stepped forward, feeling the warm moisture from her boots soak into the carpet, leaving marks. The same nurse sat behind the counter, fair-skinned, with a thin line of lips and hair pulled back into a severe ponytail, and her face remained expressionless until her gaze fell on Nia. Then her lips twitched slightly, not in a smile, not in surprise, but in that strange grimace that lives on your face when you see something that irritates you by default. "You can't be with a dog," she said, without even saying hello. "She's a service animal. I can't live without her." Nia's voice was even, but her fingers trembled under her jacket. "Show me the ID," she said sharply. Nia began to rummage through her bag. The ID was there, but it was wet. The nurse picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were a used handkerchief, glanced at it, and handed it back without saying a word. "What's your last name?" "Ford. Nia Ford. I'm scheduled for 9:30, Dr. Harper." The woman ran through the list, paused, clicked something. Then she looked straight into his eyes and finally said, "You're not in the system." Those 4 words cut through the air. Nia tensed. "I definitely had an appointment, a week ago. They confirmed it. They called me." The nurse looked past her, as if she were already something annoying, something that needed to be eliminated. "Maybe you got something mixed up, or another clinic." "No, this one. Here's a screenshot. Take a look." Nia handed over the phone, but she didn't even look. "I'm not authorized. If you're not here, you're not here." And that was it. Said as if it were an axiom. Behind her, there was another cough, and someone said out loud, "Why is she talking so loudly?" And Nia couldn't tell if they were talking about her, about Trudy, or simply about the fact that she existed in this room. "I'm not feeling well," she said a little more quietly. "I can't leave without an appointment. I just need to take my blood pressure, listen to my baby." "If you're not feeling well, call an ambulance. This is an appointment only. You're disturbing other patients." Her voice was polished, official, measured, and again her gaze slid toward the woman in the beige coat, who had just stood up and walked forward without waiting in line. Nia looked at her watch. 9:32. Everything was going according to schedule, except for her. She sat on the edge of the chair by the wall, hugging Trudy close, and felt the air around her change, not just cold, but repulsive, as if an invisible force was slowly pushing her out of the room. People were turning away, pretending to read. Some were whispering, "Why did she come here? She must have confused it with her area. Those with the dogs again. They'll think they can do anything." These phrases were not said directly. They hung in the air, stuck to her skin, to her stomach, to the animal warmth inside her. Her hands were shaking. She could hear her own pulse. Trudy froze, resting her head on her knees. The nurse spoke again, but to someone else, a white young man who arrived later and did not say the appointment time. They brought him in right away. They smiled at him. He sat down. They offered him coffee from the machine. Someone brought him water. No one offered a word to them, not a glance, just rejection. And then something twitched in her stomach. Not pain, but a jerk, an inner voice, a premonition. She tried to get up, but her legs were numb. She looked at the nurse. I really feel bad. I feel like I might. I already warned you, don't make a scene. The words came out clearly, loudly. Everyone heard. Someone was already filming on their phone, as if she were not a pregnant woman, but a troublemaker. Suddenly, a plastic cup fell next to her feet. Not by accident, it was thrown. She looked up. A teenager in the corner grinned. His mother pretended not to see anything. It was a signal. She was made to understand. You are superfluous here. You are not a patient. You are an intrusion. She lowered her gaze and pressed herself against the dog. Everything inside her was vibrating. Her heart was beating dully. Her skin was burning from the looks. Her whole body wanted one thing: to disappear, to leave, to run away. But her legs wouldn't move. She knew that if she left, she wouldn't come back. If she stayed, they would finish her off. And at that moment, an image of her husband flashed through her head. He knew where she was going. He advised her. He assured her that everything would be fine. And she believed him. She believed him because there was confidence in his voice. And now? What now? There was a wall in front of her, not made of bricks, of faces, white, cold, confident in their right to be here, the right to be higher, and she was lower than everyone, at the very bottom, and this clinic was just a mirror. Another place where a black woman was a nuisance, a threat, an inconvenience. No one cared about her child, her health, her pain. She didn't matter. And the moment another drop fell on her shoes, not rain, but a tear, she realized something was about to happen. Something was already coming, like a train, loud, unstoppable, and she was standing on the tracks. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have there ever been situations in your life when you encountered injustice, humiliation, or outright indifference? Share. It is important for us to hear you. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now, we continue. Nia was still sitting on the edge of the hard plastic chair, which seemed to have been specially designed not for comfort, but to make the person sitting in it feel as temporary, unwanted, superfluous as possible. Trudy was breathing on her knees, raising her head every now and then and glancing anxiously at the entrance, as if she sensed a danger that her owner was only just beginning to recognize. The room was stuffy, not from the temperature, but from the gaze. From an invisible pressure that was growing heavier with each passing minute. The people in the room seemed to be uniting against her in a silent alliance, an alliance of indifference and hidden contempt. They did not speak openly, but that was not required. Every movement, every glance, every unbearably polite whisper between the lines said louder than any words, "You do not belong here. You are in our way." The nurse at the counter looked up again, as if bored, and said with a new dose of irritation, "I already told you. You are not in the system. You're wasting our time. This is a medical facility, not a shelter." She said the last word as if she were deliberately adding emphasis, which meant more than just pointing to the animal next to her. Nia couldn't help herself. "I showed you the proof. Here's a screenshot, date, time, phone confirmation. This is your clinic. This is your doctor." The nurse looked at her the way someone might look at dirt that had accidentally been carried in on a heel. "Maybe you're registered at the wrong branch, or you don't have insurance, or—" She paused, and in that pause hung what she hadn't said. "Or you shouldn't have come here at all. My insurance is valid. I've been here before, a month and a half ago. I have the same doctor. Why are you refusing to see me?" Nia's voice broke, and a sharp, dangerous note appeared in it. Not aggression, but pain. Burning, rising in the throat. "Because you're not following protocol," she replied, her face deadpan. "You've come with an animal, you don't have a full registration for today, and you're violating the admissions procedure. The rules are the same for everyone. Everything. Everyone. Except for those who are smiled at, who are shown in, who are offered coffee, who are not looked at as a threat." She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, only the pressure. Her head was pounding. Protocol, rules, safety, order. Everything sounded like a sentence, like an excuse not to let her in where she wasn't wanted. They didn't want to treat her. They wanted to remove her, unnoticed, officially, through bureaucracy, through a smile with teeth behind it. "Animals are prohibited," the nurse repeated again, like a spell. "I already told you, this is a service dog. I'm pregnant. I have panic attacks. I can't live without her. Where's the certificate? Where's the medical confirmation? Where's the dog's certificate? This isn't a dog club here." Nia froze. Her heart sank. "I'm losing my baby. I can feel it." The words came out too quietly, almost a whisper, but no one reacted. Not a single one of the seated women turned around. The guard in the corner continued to stare at the monitor. The nurse reached for the phone. "If you refuse to leave the room voluntarily, I will call security. This is a violation of protocol. You are interfering with the work of the institution. You are aggressive." Aggressive? She, with a wet jacket, with trembling hands, with eyes full of tears, with her breath knocked out of humiliation. Aggressive because she was breathing, because she was asking, because she dared to demand to be treated like a human being. Her legs rose on their own. She stood, and for a second it seemed to her that the entire room had become lower. Lower in dignity, lower in humanity, lower in conscience. And she was higher, higher in her truth, in her pain. But before she could take a single step, a voice came from behind her. "Ma'am, leave the premises, immediately." It was the second guard, the one with the heavy boots and short hair. His voice was tired, but there was a habit of power in it. He did not look her in the eyes, only at her hands, assessing, analyzing, bracing himself. She understood. Another second, and she would be escorted out, for coming to a place where neither she nor her child were wanted, for her skin not matching the upholstery of the chairs, for her voice being too loud in a world where such voices were preferred not to be heard. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly but clearly. And at that moment, the contraction pushed her again, sharp, abrupt, to the point of black spots in her eyes. She doubled over. Trudy barked, people recoiled, someone screamed, someone grabbed a bag. Panic? No. Disgust. "Here it comes," the woman in the beige coat whispered. The nurse was already talking into the phone. "Yes, she's aggressive, threatening, lunging. Yes, with an animal. Send someone. Now." They were making her a threat, a pregnant woman, a desperate mother. She was a threat, like they always do, like they do in the news, in the headlines, in the reports, in distant phrases like resisted arrest, left the building voluntarily, did not meet requirements. She slowly sank to her knees. She was out of sight behind the counter. Trudy lay down next to her. She could feel the blood starting to pool between her legs. Warm, slow, quiet. Blood like a protest, like an accusation. Someone said, "Ugh, disgusting." Another, "Of course they do everything for show." The clerk continued dictating into the phone. The guard was already walking towards her. Her hand was on her stomach. And she knew. A child. He feels everything. He hears. He knows that he is not expected. That his mother is an enemy. That he himself is a threat. In a world where skin color is a sentence, where rules are just a reason not to see, not to hear, not to help. And at that moment, she understood. There is no way back. Everything that was cut off. Everything that will be is already different. And when the guard approached, she did not rise. She remained on her knees, silently, without hysteria, without words. like a stone in the center of someone else's world, like a reproach, like pain that no one wants to acknowledge, but which will not go away, even if it is thrown out the door. The door slammed behind her with a dull click that thundered louder than any scream, louder than any word, like the final confirmation that she was no longer a nobody here. She was literally pushed out, not by words, not by gestures, but by bodies, by pressure, by the guard's commanding gait, by hands that left no bruises but something worse, a trace of powerlessness. She took a step forward, 1, 2, and then didn't take a step at all, but stumbled, tripping over her own foot, and only Trudy, faithful, old, wet Trudy, managed to put herself under her body, preventing her from falling face down on the stones. The rain poured down angrily, as if it wanted to wash her away along with the blood that was already slowly and quietly soaking the grey fabric of her pants. She didn't see it right away. At first there was just wetness, sticky and trickling down her thighs, then warmth, strange, out of place in the cold street, and then shock, like an electric shock. Blood, not internal, not the kind that burns the thoughts, but real, living, black, in the wet light of a cloudy morning. She sank to her knees, not of her own free will. Her legs buckled, like a horse's under a load it could no longer carry. Spots swam before her eyes, not from the blood, but from humiliation. It all happened like in slow motion. There she was, sitting. There a woman with a grocery bag walking past, recoiling, turning aside without looking. There a guy with headphones, glancing as if he were passing a homeless person. There an old woman, holding an umbrella, not even slowing down. No one, not a single person, not a single one came up. Not a single one said, "Can I help you?" Not a single one. Only the dog, wet and shivering, continued to press itself against her, licking her fingers, looking up at her as if asking for forgiveness for not being able to do more. Her clothes stuck to her skin. The cold penetrated her chest. The trembling became constant, like an engine of pain inside. She wanted to scream, but only a wheeze came out of her throat. And then a cry, strange, convulsive, not like a woman's, but like a child who had been abandoned. She hugged herself, covered herself with her arms, bent over, pressing her forehead to her knees, and closed her eyes, as if it were possible to disappear simply by an effort of will. The clinic building behind her lived its own life. People came in, people came out, they saw her, and passed her by, as if she were trash, as if she were passing something that didn't concern them. Someone was taking pictures. Someone was filming. One man said loudly into the phone, "Some kind of psycho, pregnant and with a dog, sitting in the rain, screaming, probably homeless, without home." She felt the words cutting into her skull like nails. She wanted to scream, "I have a home, I have a husband, I have everything you have." But who would listen to her? Who hears the scream when you are already recorded in the minds of passers-by as a problem, as superfluous, as one of those? Who will help a black woman sitting in blood and dirt at the threshold of a clinic when you have a coffee in your hand and clean shoes? Another man passed. He looked and whispered to someone nearby. They always put on a show. Always. A show. Humiliation as a performance. Pain as a production. Death as an act. Tears as a challenge. She slowly raised her head. Her eyelashes were stuck together from the rain. Her eyes were bloodshot. There was a hum inside her like a siren. Trudy howled, quietly, briefly, with horror in her voice. Nia knew that if something didn't change right now, if she didn't get up right now, stand up, get somewhere, she wouldn't survive. Not them, not the child. She, herself. She leaned on her hands, got to her feet, and sat down again. Her head was spinning. Nausea was rising in her throat. The world around her was swimming, as if in water. She heard footsteps, heavy, fast. Someone had approached, she thought. Finally. But it was the guard. The same one. He stood there, offering no help, saying nothing, just looking. And then, without raising his voice, he said, "You must leave the area. According to protocol, you cannot stay here." Po-pro. Tu. Ko. Lu. That word again, like a hammer. According to protocol. Everything that was happening to her, according to protocol. Not help, not care, not a medical obligation, only pushing out, only removal, only clearing the space of presence. And she realized, if she stood up now, she would be alone. If she fell, no one would pick her up. She stood up, slowly, supporting herself with one hand on the curb. Her back ached, her stomach was pulling, blood was dripping onto the sidewalk. She couldn't hide it. No way. She walked, staggering, Trudy beside her. An intersection ahead, a store, a gas station. She didn't know where. The main thing was to get away from the door that had pushed her out, away from the windows with faces without compassion behind them. She had been squeezed out like a stain, like a failure, like a black stain on white upholstery. And even if she died right at the entrance, they would have simply called the paramedics, not an ambulance, the paramedics, to take her away, not save her, take her away. And that was the truth. Simple, cold, no excuses, no turn, no chance. Nia took a few steps, but her legs wouldn't obey her anymore. She felt her body becoming alien, heavy, as if it was no longer hers, but just a shell that had no more strength. The rain continued to pour, and every drop that hit her skin was like a small blow, as if the world itself had decided to show how much it didn't want her. She reached the edge of the sidewalk, bumped into the wall of a building, and suddenly her legs gave out. As if a cable, stretched to the limit, suddenly snapped. She sank to the asphalt, sitting down with a noise right on the cold and dirty concrete. Trudy was at her side in an instant, her paws running around her, as if trying to lift her, her licking hands with excitement, with anxiety. She heard the dog whine, but it was not just a whine. It was the cry of an animal that feels someone else's pain, that experiences the suffering of its owner. He licked her hand as if it were the last time. The dog's warm tongue was her only consolation in this lifeless world where she was no longer. She looked into Trudy's eyes, and in that look there was everything: love, loyalty, and despair. But it didn't help. People passed by. One man with a suitcase, clutching it to himself, glanced at her briefly, but quickly turned away, as if he hadn't seen her. A woman with a child, holding his hand, took a wide step to the side, avoiding her with her gaze, as if she could infect her with her poverty, her other skin, her existence. No one stopped. No one came. Her tears merged with the rain, and only Trudy did not move away. Suddenly, the phone in her hand vibrated, and Nia felt a faint hope, like a light breeze on the hottest day. But looking at the screen, she saw that it was dead, before she even had time to get up, before she even had time to think how to help herself. All she had left was this dog, and a feeling of complete loneliness, complete destruction, a feeling that she no longer existed for this world. She tried to get up, but her body did not obey. She had no strength. Her heart beat like a drum, echoing in her temples, but her chest was empty, like in an abandoned house where there was no life for a long time. She closed her eyes. "Help me, Lord, I can't take it anymore." Scraps of thoughts were spinning in her head, merging into a mess, into a single melancholy that could not be controlled. She was so ashamed, so bitter that her life turned out to be so cheap, that people walked around her like a dirty spot on the sidewalk. Why was everything like this? Why was she unimportant? Why did she not have the right to care, to love, to help? Why was she rejected? Why did the world abandon her closest person, not even giving her a chance? She tried to find strength in herself, but no matter how hard she tried, everything went awry. Her life was like a huge trash can, where everyone threw everything they didn't want to show, and she was that trash. You are not worthy. That was the only thought that never left her head. It sounded even in the voices of passers-by, in their looks, in their certainty that she had no right to this world. The understanding that she did not belong to them, to this place, to this city, to this life simply tore her soul apart. Suddenly, passing by, a man in a black suit looked at her, and his eyes lingered a little longer than the others. He did not look away, but in his eyes there was nothing else, just disgust, as if he really saw her as trash. At that second, she felt her eyes fill with hot tears that fell and mixed with the rain, and her lips barely held back a scream. Nia could no longer remain silent. She looked at his face, his certainty, his coldness, his indifference, his condemnation. "Why are you doing this to me? Why do you hate me?" She could barely say the words. They were so hard to say, like they were stuck somewhere in her throat, but she did it. The man stopped. He looked at her, but he didn't say a word. He just turned aside and continued on his way. He didn't stop. He didn't try to help. He didn't want to help, and no one who passed by wanted to. All that was there was her own tragedy, her own fear, her own pain that no one wanted to share. Time passed, and the rain didn't stop. She sat on the asphalt, in tears, with blood on her clothes, and with the only friend who didn't leave her, an old, shaggy dog who licked her hands, as if asking for forgiveness for everything she couldn't change. Nia knew there would be no help. No one would help. This world would not accept her, but she was still here. Trudy was with her, and this thought was the only thing that gave her strength. Even if it was small, even if it remained in the last hope that someone, somewhere, sometime would see her. But according to everything that happened, it never happened. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever had similar situations in your life when you had to face injustice or indifference? It is very important for us to know your opinion and experiences. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now, we continue. When Nia had almost given up hope, when her eyes were starting to close from fatigue and pain, when all her strength had gone into the emptiness that was piercing her chest, suddenly, someone passing by noticed her. He stopped. A middle-aged man with a neat beard, in a leather jacket, with a serious expression on his face. He looked at her, then at the dog, then back at her, and without saying a word, he took out his phone. He called. Soon, the sounds of a siren cut through the quiet, gloomy city, and an ambulance stopped on the other side of the street. Two paramedics in orange suits approached Nia. One was tall, with dark hair and thick eyebrows, and the other was a little older, with grey hair at the temples and a tired look. It was as if they were used to such scenes, used to poverty, to misery, to women sitting on the sidewalks with what they called garbage bags on their feet, their bellies full of pain and despair. They looked at her quickly, with the same indifference with which they usually looked at people forgotten by this world, who no longer mattered. "Are you unwell?" asked the elder, without any warmth in his voice. Nia tried to answer, but her chest was too tense. Her ribs were compressed. She could not breathe normally, as if there was no air in her lungs, only a sharp edge of pain. "Something wrong?" he repeated. Nia nodded, but it did not matter. All that mattered was her skin, her origin, her poverty. Nothing else mattered. "Mommy, I told you not to in this weather," the second paramedic spoke, not looking at her. He looked at his partner and added, "Look how dirty you are, with a dog in your arms. And without a mask. Where are you going, huh?" He spoke as if her suffering was her fault, as if she deserved what was happening to her. There was no sympathy in his voice, only irritation. It was the same tone she heard in the hospital when they wouldn't admit her. The same one that was on the faces of all those who didn't say help. The one that became her real shadow. "Why didn't you go to a normal clinic?" asked the nurse who stood next to the paramedics, asking the question without any concern, as if she understood that a normal clinic was a clinic where Nia had no right to be, where her place was behind the door, out of turn, outside of society. Nia tried to speak again, but her words got stuck in her throat. She saw the paramedics exchanging glances, moving awkwardly as if she shouldn't be in their car. "Are you even registered anywhere?" the older one asked. "Do you have insurance?" the nurse added, as if that was her only interest. The usual questions. The usual, everyday questions they didn't ask other people with white faces, and they didn't wait for an answer. But they continued to take her out of their arms, to treat her body like something secondary, something indecent, something that shouldn't be in their normal world. Nia felt herself being pushed away again. All that was in this world was hostility, humiliation, indifference. No care, no help. Only answers to questions that didn't concern her. "We need to take her to a cheap hospital on the outskirts," the paramedic said, and his words were like a cold knife. This wasn't a hospital. This wasn't just a clinic. This was a hospital for people like her, for those forgotten, for those no one was waiting for those who weren't worth being there. But there she went. There was no one else to take her. This was her destiny, a hospital where people were treated like objects, where there was no treatment, no compassion, only formalities. Nia tried to understand what it all meant. How did she end up here? Why was no one trying to help her? She closed her eyes, feeling a tear fall from hers. "Just take her out," the paramedic said. And they didn't wait for her to arrive. They didn't ask how she was feeling. They just started acting like she didn't exist anymore. She wasn't a patient to them. She wasn't a woman to them. She was just an object to be taken somewhere. She didn't matter anymore. The cheap hospital examined her like a stale patient, filling out a few paper forms. And then, as if they didn't even care about her condition, they started doing things that didn't make sense. She was exhausted. Her body ached. The baby inside her felt it. Everything was dark and foreign. As they laid her down in the chair, she felt her stomach tugging, and Trudy sat down next to her, her tail wagging restlessly. The doctor they met didn't look her in the eye. He just said, "Are you okay?" and continued filling out her chart as if it were her own business. He wasn't concerned. He was busy. He was busy with paperwork. Nia felt the pain rolling in, her body no longer obeying her, her voice catching in her throat. But the worst thing was not the pain. It was what she realized. This world wasn't going to save her. This world wasn't waiting for her. It didn't care. It had closed in around her like a well she couldn't climb out of. All she could do was sit in this place, in this cheap hospital, where they treated her only on formalities, and no one looked at her anymore. She was alone. Again, she was always alone. When Nia came to, it took her a few seconds to realize where she was. The gentle voices of the paramedics, the doctors, the other sounds. They were all echoes from another world. She was lying on a hard bed, cold and uncomfortable, with sheets that were stained not only with her blood, but with the blood of her unborn child. Along the wall were metal shelves, barely noticeable with rust, and dim lamps that illuminated the room, like an old hospital where they threw those who were no longer needed. She was there, in the place they had decided for her, where her body was just another case, rough, restless, mute. When the door opened, a doctor came in, a middle-aged man in a white coat. He didn't say hello. He just walked over, looked at her chart, then at her, then at the chart again. Then he said, "So, what do we have here?" His voice was hoarse, like someone who had worked in this place for too long and had long since lost all humanity. "Are you okay?" he asked, but not with interest, but in the way one asks when it is required by instructions. She could not answer right away. She had no strength. He seemed detached, not interested in her feelings or her experiences. Just a check, like in a warehouse, checking what was wrong with the goods. He probably did not even understand that this was not just an incident for her, but a tragedy. Her tragedy. The doctor turned to the nurse who was standing at the door. She still did not pay attention to Nia, did not look her in the eye, did not care about her condition. "Prepare her for the examination," he said. "We'll do an ultrasound now. We'll see what's there," he added, as if all this was some kind of process and not a human experience. They did not have time to warn her. They did not have time to lead her to this. It was all done without any feeling, without empathy, with mechanical coldness. She lay there, feeling her body shrinking in pain again, but she couldn't say anything. She couldn't resist. She just clenched her fists, feeling her whole life, her future, her hope flowing out of her. "Maybe there was no baby?" one of the doctors asked suspiciously. He was standing at her feet, holding some equipment in his hands. It wasn't a question of caring, not a question of trying to understand, but simply a statement that left no room for an answer. as if it was her own fault that she had lost the baby, as if she had done it, as if it were her fault. It wasn't for her. It was for everyone, for their convenience, so that their world could continue to function without irritants, without people like her. Someone had already called another hospital where it was easier, where ordinary people like her could find a place. He didn't know that her life was more than just a mistake, more than just an accident. She wasn't in this world by mistake. She was here. She was. But to everyone, she was just another worthless woman, another woman who lacked the means, the rights, the ability to change anything. Giving up was impossible. But still, Nia felt her body giving up on her. She couldn't feel anymore. She couldn't breathe anymore. And everything that was happening to her was a fight between what was staying inside and what was taking her away. During the examination, when the doctors stepped aside, she noticed how one of the orderlies standing by the door took out his phone. He was filming her. Right there, in this dirty hospital, where they were treating her like garbage, like something unnecessary. He was filming her body, filming everything. She caught his gaze. He understood what she saw, but he didn't erase the picture. He wasn't afraid. He looked at her like a spectacle, like something to show his friends, like a horror that couldn't be real until it was on screen. All she felt was horror. This was her reality. Horror, captured on a phone. In that moment, Nia realized that her life had become part of some kind of farce. No matter how they talked about it, no matter how they justified it, she no longer had a place in this world. Her body was shrinking. The pain was inside, and nothing could stop it. When the doctors finally finished their manipulations, they left her alone in the room. She lay, forgotten, alone. No help, no support. And only the dark sky outside the window, in which there were no stars, said that this place was not her place. She could no longer hope that she would be saved. The doctors did not believe in her. They did not believe her. They did not believe that she was standing in front of them at all, that her life was significant. They could just leave her like this. The pain wasn't in her body. The pain was that no one understood that her existence here had any meaning. A strange woman. A strange mother. That was it. Nothing more. All that was left was Trudy's quiet whine as she clung to her, licking her hand, trying to comfort her, trying to make this world less cruel somehow. But for Nia, this world was already lost. It didn't know what it was to love. It didn't know what it was to be human. All that was there was fear and loneliness that could no longer be cast aside. Nia sat on the cold hospital floor, in the very place where she was no longer wanted, no longer sought. She was forgotten, alone, rejected. Her body was covered in bloodstains. Her hands were wet, sticky, and it seemed to permeate her skin, her soul, her everything. In the dark corners of her mind, there was only one thought. She was here, in this place, because there was no place for her here. There were only formalities, only rules, and nothing else mattered. She was not a patient. She was not a woman. She was just a body that needed to be dealt with. Protocol. Protocol decided everything. She could never understand why everything that was happening was alien to her, like an unnecessary thing. Why she was not given the slightest chance for help. Why her life was just a procedure. When she returned to the room, no one was there. Only occasionally did the nurses flash by in the corridor, never once looking at her. She was alone, simply alone in this world. And then, when she tried to reach for her mobile phone to at least call someone, she received another blow. The medical record was gone. She tried to explain that her record was there, that she had left it there, but her words were drowned in cold silence. When she returned to the reception area, there, behind the counter, stood the same nurse, with the same indifferent face, as if she had not seen Nia 1,000 times in these few hours. In her hands, there was nothing that could give Nia a chance. She said, "You are not registered. We cannot accept you." A simple, cold, heartless statement that was completely devoid of sympathy or even an attempt to understand. But how? "I am registered. I did everything as it should be. I do not understand." Her voice was hoarse with despair. You were told you were being denied further treatment, the nurse replied, without looking up. We can't accept patients who aren't in the system. The system that took away the right to treatment, the right to help, as if it were just numbers and a code. The system that decided she wasn't worthy. This clinic, this place, was no longer her home. She didn't belong here. Her existence didn't matter here. She found herself back on the threshold, in the hallway where there were no people to help, where even a dog had no right to be near her. Trudy, her only friend, her animal, who hadn't left her, hadn't gone away, hadn't returned to the others, hadn't abandoned her like the world had, wasn't here with her. When Naya tried to follow her, she collided with the guard standing at the door. He wouldn't let Trudy in. An animal shouldn't be here, he said, his voice low, but with the same contempt in his eyes that she knew. She can't get through. She can't be with you. The word can't was the key. It meant that her animal, her faithful companion, her help, her support, had no right to be with her. It was the final touch to her humiliation. She was left alone, without a dog, without support, without the slightest hope of help. She stood in that empty hallway, her head spinning, her heart ready to burst out of her chest. The pain was not only physical, but also mental. She tried to find at least something that could support her, but there was nothing here. No doctors, no people, not even what she could call help. In that moment, she realized she had lost more than just a child. She had lost everything. This world was not for her. It was not for people like her. It was for others, for those who remain silent and obey, for those who do not cause anyone concern, for those who look right. She began to realize that her life had become part of someone else's statistics. She was just a number in this system. The system had cut her off from anyone who could help her, and left her here, in this cold hallway surrounded by doors behind which no one was waiting for her. The guard came up to her again, and he looked at her as if he wanted her to understand. She did not belong here. She did not belong in this world. He said, "You must leave the territory." And those words, those simple, cold words, were her sentence. Nia could not get up. She remained sitting on the floor, feeling her body refuse to obey more and more. Her fingers became like ice. There was an emptiness in her chest, and her body began to be pulled downwards, as if it was preparing to dissolve in this place. All she felt was endless loneliness, and she realized that she could not get out of here anymore. The system had won. All there was blood on the floor, and an emptiness in her soul. There were no doctors, no people, no dog, nothing. Only the walls that whispered, "You are not wanted here." Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever had moments in your life when you had to deal with injustice or indifference? It is important for us to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now, we continue. By the time Nia got home, the rain had long since stopped, but the sky was still heavy, as if it was trying to swallow her up, take her with it into the darkness she felt inside. She stepped through the door, but didn't feel the usual warmth. Her husband was home, as always, sitting on the couch, in the same position he took when he came home from work, his feet on the table, his eyes fixed on the TV, his hands folded listlessly across his stomach. Nia closed the door behind her and stood frozen in the hallway. It seemed he hadn't even noticed her coming in. She stood there for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened to her, but her thoughts were blurry, her head was heavy, and her body felt like it was glued together from 1,000 pieces, no longer holding any strength or hope. Nia finally took a step forward and put her bag on the table. He didn't look up. He didn't say, "Hello." He just sat there. She couldn't stay silent any longer. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the couch next to him, her hands on her knees, her eyes shining with tears that she could no longer hold back. All she needed was to tell him the truth. Everything she had been through, everything that had happened to her. She had to share it with him. She had to tell him so that he would support her. But as soon as she started telling him what had happened at the clinic, he didn't turn around. He didn't even look at her. He continued to stare at the TV screen, as if everything that was happening, both her words and her pain, didn't matter. "You know what happened, right?" she asked, trying to keep some confidence in her voice. She watched him, how his face didn't change, how his expression remained the same, cold and lifeless. "I got kicked out." Her words seemed to hang in the air, not reaching him. He was still sitting there, and her words didn't reach him. There was no help, you understand? "I lost my child." She tried to speak out now, tried to digest this nightmare, but the words wouldn't come out. He remained silent. It seemed as if the whole world had disappeared, and only she was left in this room, alone, helpless, with the pain that remained in her body, and with the feeling that she couldn't explain. "Can you hear me?" Her voice broke, and she felt her throat tighten. He didn't answer. He didn't say a word. Nia lowered her eyes, but she still continued to speak, despite the silence that filled the space between them. "They didn't accept me. They threw me out with a stomach, with blood, with pain. I felt like I was losing my child. They didn't even try to help. They didn't even try to understand. There were only contemptuous looks, and I couldn't stand it." Her voice trembled, and the tears rolled faster and faster without stopping. He remained silent. The silence in the room grew louder, as if his silence was a punishment for her. He still sat there, motionless, and Nia felt her heart breaking from it. How her husband, the man who once told her that he would be there for her whenever she was in trouble, had now become a stranger. She no longer felt in him the man who had once been her support. She did not feel in him the man who would have supported her at least once in her life. After a few minutes, when her tears began to dry up, he finally looked at her, but not with sympathy, not with pain. He simply looked, as if he was discussing something anxiously. "What is the address of the clinic?" he asked after an hour, as if nothing had happened, as if his wife had not experienced any fear, pain, or humiliation. He was not concerned. He was not sympathetic. His words were empty, cold, distant, as if he had asked a question about something unimportant, insignificant. It wasn't a question. It was just a continuation of a dialogue that he didn't know how to end. He was trying to bring her back to normal, but she couldn't come back. Nia was looking at him with such intensity, with such bitterness, that she felt her eyes filling with tears once again. "Don't you understand?" she asked, trying to make him understand at least a little, to try to feel at least a part of what was happening to her. "What's the address of the clinic?" he repeated, and this time he avoided her gaze again. He wasn't looking at her anymore. His eyes were directed to the side, into emptiness, and there was nothing in his voice that could comfort her. And perhaps he didn't even notice how she, like a burnt-out star, slowly disappeared, lost in silence. She felt her body freeze, like something inside her broke completely. She stood up and walked to the door, but she didn't turn around. She didn't say a word. As she walked down the hall, she heard him stand up and say quietly, "I don't understand why you couldn't just go to a normal clinic." The words sounded like a gunshot, like the last nail that drove her into this tomb. She walked out, feeling the walls closing in around her, the world falling apart again. But she couldn't go back now. She knew now. No amount of explanation would help. No amount of love would save her. There was only this cold in her life, and she was alone. Nia sat at the table in the dark kitchen, alone in this huge, empty house. She still couldn't understand what had happened to her. Everything that had happened. The clinic, getting kicked out, no sympathy, no help. It wasn't just physical pain. It was something much worse. It was betrayal. That moment when you realize the world you believed in doesn't exist. The world you thought you had a place in is gone. Everything is falling apart. She slowly looked through the papers on the table. At first, they were insignificant things. Bills, notices, advertising flyers. But then her gaze lingered on the accounting folder. Her gaze caught on a familiar name on the top page. His last name. It was unexpected. Nia couldn't understand why these papers were on the table. She couldn't figure out what exactly had made her turn over the folder and start reading. But soon she understood. Every page was linked to a chain of clinics, in which she was just one of many cases. Doctors' contracts, accounting statements, payments, invoices. Everything was in his name, in her husband's name. Everything, his entire life, his career, his power. In her hands was a book full of her own pain. She turned the pages, her heart clenching, as if she were reading her own sentence. Everything that had happened to her was part of his business. He was the owner of the clinics. He was the one who decided who was worthy of treatment and who was not. These were his employees, his rules, his decisions. Everything that had happened to her was part of his world, a world she now truly saw, a world in which she had never been more than a commodity to be disposed of. Her hands were shaking. She turned the pages, and every word became brighter, heavier. Payment for services, compensation for treatment, refusal of admission. These phrases flashed before her eyes, and each word cut. She tried to calm down, but she couldn't. How long had she not known? How long had she been blind, believing that her husband was her protection, her support, her support? And now she understood. He was part of this machine, part of the system that destroyed her. He was not her friend. He was part of what made her life impossible. Her thoughts were spinning, and every time she tried to stop the flow, a new revelation would invade her consciousness. On one of the pages, she saw a receipt for payments to the staff of the clinics. On every line, his name, his signature. He knew what had happened to her. He knew she had been thrown out. He knew she had been humiliated, that her body had not received what it deserved, that she was just a helpless woman in their game. He knew this, and he kept quiet. He kept quiet because it suited him. This was his business, his interests, his rules, and nothing that happened to her mattered. She was no more than one of many he used to make money. She was no more than an incident who, if she was worth anything, was only to raise his empires. Her pain did not matter. Her suffering did not matter. How could you, she whispered to herself, not believing that all these documents, these deeds, these bills were real? He was there. He was in her life. He knew her body. He knew her dreams. He knew her weaknesses. And all this time, he was just playing his role. He was her husband, but only on paper. In reality, he was part of the system that destroyed her. He was the one who gave her up. He was the one who didn't even give her a chance. He was the one who decided who could live and who couldn't. Her heart sank, and she felt the air in the room grow heavy. Her body felt trapped, and every breath was painful. She felt her hands shaking and her eyes filling with tears again. She couldn't believe that this man who had been with her for so many years was the one behind her humiliation. She couldn't believe that this man was part of the one who had kicked her out, who had left her alone, who had let her lose her child. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but it wasn't relief. It was disappointment. It was despair. It was the realization that she had been deceived, that her life had been part of someone else's game. She looked at those documents and felt something break inside her. This was the end. This was the end of everything she had ever believed in. Everything that had been her world was now just ashes. She stood up, but her legs wouldn't hold her. She leaned on the table and the papers trembled in her hands. She couldn't stay here any longer, in this house, in this life. She had to do something. She had to tell him everything. She had to find out what was going on. But her soul no longer believed in him. She couldn't believe his words or his promises. He was part of what had happened to her. And now she was alone, without him. Alone in this system that would never accept her. Alone among those who looked down on her, like trash, like a nobody. She looked at the papers again and took the last step, a step towards goodbye. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from. Have you ever experienced injustice or betrayal in your life? It is very important for us to know your opinion and experiences. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation. And now, we continue. When Nia entered the room, she felt her heart beating in her chest, as if it was trying to break out. She walked down the hallway, through this empty house where every step echoed, and there was not a single thought in her head except that she had to talk to him. She had to know the truth. She had to hear it from him. Everything that had happened, everything she had experienced could not be an accident. She could not stay in this dead end any longer, not knowing what was happening, not understanding how and why her life had turned into such pain. Her soul was wounded, her heart was broken, but she could not remain silent any longer. She could not stay in this nightmare any longer without figuring out who was to blame. When she entered the room, her husband was sitting on the sofa, as always, in his usual position, but there was nothing in his eyes that could help her. He was cold. He was distant. He was not the man she loved. He was a stranger, and she knew it, but she had to know the truth. She had to understand what was happening, why it all happened this way, why she was alone, why she was betrayed. "I know you knew about the clinics. You knew what happened to me." Her voice was loud but controlled. There were no tears in it. There was only pain, only bitterness and despair. She could not hold back any longer. He raised his head and looked at her. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her as if she was something that didn't matter. "Don't you understand?" she asked, stepping closer, her breathing heavy. "You knew I was there, that they kicked me out, and you did nothing. You stayed silent. You said nothing. You were part of it. You were part of what destroyed me." He remained silent. His eyes were empty, cold. There was no sign of guilt or regret in his gaze. She felt her heart squeeze. At that moment, she realized that she would not find sympathy. She would not find what she was waiting for. "You don't understand, do you?" His voice was cold, merciless, like ice. "I should have known how you would act under pressure. You're weak." It was said calmly, without any emotion. He said it as if it was just a statement of fact. Her hands were shaking. She couldn't believe her ears. She couldn't understand what he was saying. "What did you say?" Her voice was barely audible, but he repeated it again. "You're weak. This was a test. I had to see how you would act, how you would fight, how you would respond to pressure. You couldn't handle it. You gave in. You were weak. You can't be around if you can't handle things like this." His words hit her like blows. She couldn't understand. "Were you testing me?" she asked, but her voice was tight. "Were you testing me to see how strong I was, how much pain I could take, so you could know if I was right for you?" He nodded, pulling away again, returning to his callous stance. "Not the first time, Nia. I've tested others too. That's what I do. I have to know how people behave, how they react when they're on edge. And you failed that test. You're weak." He said it like it didn't matter to him. He felt no pain, no regret, no shame. To him, it was just a game. That was all. She was just a tool in his game. She stood in the room, not knowing what to do. She tried to find the strength to say something, but the words were stuck in her throat. She couldn't believe this was happening. It was so ridiculous, so painful. Everything she had been through, everything she had endured. It had just been a test, just an experiment, in which she had found herself on the losing side. "You know I can't live like this anymore," she said, her voice hard, but there was so much pain in it that she could barely contain it. "I can't be with someone who sees me as a test. I can't be with someone who tests me, who uses me as part of his game." Again, he didn't say a word. He sat like stone, motionless, expressionless. No reaction, no pain, no empathy. He was as she had always seen him, cold, calculating, ruthless. "I can't do this anymore." Her voice broke, and she couldn't say anything else. She knew she couldn't be around him. She couldn't be around someone who used her, who saw her as an object for his experiments, who humiliated her, who put her under this constant pressure to test her. She couldn't. She turned and walked towards the door. He didn't even get up to stop her. He sat there, as always, and said nothing. Her footsteps echoed in the empty room, and she knew that it was over now. She had lost not only her child, but her husband. Everything that had been was shattered, but now she was free. Free of him. Free of his control. Free of his manipulation. As she closed the door behind her, she felt something break inside her. But she didn't want to be weak anymore. She didn't want to live in a world where her pain was a game. She didn't want to be in a world where her suffering was just a test. She was ready to move on. But that freedom cost her everything. Nia woke up that day in a daze, as if she were waking up from a long nightmare. She couldn't remember how she fell asleep. Everything that had happened yesterday seemed distant, unreal, like some movie she couldn't finish watching. She opened her eyes, feeling a headache, as if she had been lying down for a long time. Twisted, as if her body was not her own. But when she tried to sit up, her eyes found the empty space next to her. He was there. He had been next to her. And now he was gone. She looked around the room, trying to figure out where he was. The silence that reigned in the house seemed alien and oppressive. She went to the door to leave and noticed how her legs were giving way, how the weakness was not leaving her. But this time it was not due to physical fatigue. It was something else, an emptiness, a hopelessness that she felt in every cell of her body. There was no trace of him in the room, no trace of his clothes, no scent, nothing. He was gone. She noticed her hands shaking, and with every step she took, she felt everything around her begin to crumble. There was no cup of his in the kitchen, no keys. It was as if he had never been there. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. But even outside, there was no world as she knew it. Everything was different. She felt the cold creeping under her clothes, the world around her becoming alien and hostile. When she returned to the house, a small detail caught her attention. There were stains on the floor, next to the door. Blood stains. It was not something random. She could not understand how it could be, but the traces of blood led to the exit, to the place where he had stood before. She looked around the room again, and now she understood. He was gone, and her dog was gone too. She stood in this room, not knowing what to do, but everything around her seemed impossible, unbearable. All these past weeks, all her worries, all these revelations, and now, he was gone. Gone. Left her. All that was left were traces of blood on the floor that led into emptiness. Trudy, her faithful friend, the dog who had been with her in her darkest moments, was gone too. She tried to call him, but the phone was dead. He didn't answer, like he always did. He was silent, as if he didn't want to hear from her. He was silent, as if she was nothing to him. No support, no sympathy. He was gone, as if she didn't exist, as if she meant nothing, as if her suffering wasn't real. Everything she had gone through seemed like an empty sound now, an unbearable, painful sound that couldn't stop. Days passed. She tried to go outside, but all she saw was despair. Every step she took through this city felt like a step into nothingness. Every face she met was a face that ignored her pain. She was alone. She stood there, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do. Everything was gone. Everything that had once been, everything she loved was gone. And then one morning, as she was trying to find the strength to continue, she saw him. Not him, but her dog. Trudy was alive. She was standing in the doorway looking at her. Her eyes were full of fear, full of something that could not be said in words. She walked up to the dog, and as she bent down to pet it, she noticed something strange. The dog was dirty, its fur was covered in dust, but its eyes, its look, it was the look of an animal that had experienced something terrible. Trudy was alive, but she was alone. She stood there, looking at her mistress, and in her eyes there was a question that could not be answered. Where was he? Where was her master? Why was she abandoned? Why was she here, alone, in this empty world? Nia wrapped her arms around her dog, holding her close. She felt her heart clench at what was happening. It was a pain that was too strong, too real, to ignore. Everything she had been through now felt inevitable, something she couldn't stop. And in that moment, as she looked into Trudy's eyes, she realized that no matter what had happened, no matter how far she had been from people, no matter who had left her, she was alive, and her dog was with her. A few days later, as Nia stood by her window, she saw a familiar face on the news. It was her picture. On the screen was a nameless woman who had been found in the woods. In the background, her dog, standing next to her, looking straight into the camera, alive, with eyes full of fear and a silent answer to all the questions that would never be asked. It was a strange, incredible feeling to see herself on the screen, but as if it was no longer her, but someone else. A woman whose story had been forgotten, whose life had been erased, no name, no details, just her face and her dog. And no one knew what had happened to her. No one knew how she had survived all of this. No one knew how she had been abandoned, how she had suffered. All that was left was the image on the screen, a nameless woman, a woman who had been forgotten, a woman who had disappeared. And her dog, who had remained by her side, staring into the lens as if she too was part of this story, part of all this oblivion, a particle that had lost its place in this world. And so her story ended. The woman who was gone. The woman who was forgotten. The woman whose life was nothing until she became a symbol of silence, a symbol of those who were rejected. And all that was left was her dog, a living reminder that she had been, but her name no longer mattered. What do you think about this story? Have you ever experienced racism or injustice in your life that left a mark? Your thoughts and experiences are very important to us. Each of you is incredibly valuable to us, and we sincerely thank you for your support. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. We would be happy if you left a comment, for example, with the phrase, "I'm listening to the end," so we know that you are with us until the very end. Have a great day.